much for having me. I'm Nicholas from Believe in Finland. Thank you for the distinguished speakers, and they're very interesting presentations. Unfortunately, I'm after Jacques, so it's going to be difficult to beat. But I'm going to be talking about the practicalities related to doing many of the similar things that we were talking about before. So secondhand reuse and how you actually go about the day-to-day processes regarding it. Some of the material I'll be talking about, or what I'd like to be talking about, is mostly covered by NDA, so I will be talking about what I can. So a little bit about our company first. So we're working in the Scandinavian areas. We're doing a relatively good amount of projects per year, and we have something like 1,000 professionals in our company working in the environmental sector. So that's on the group level. And on the demolition side, we're a medium-sized operator, but something I'd like to draw our attention to is we're talking about the recycling rate a lot. So we use the term reutilization rate. So that's basically everything that can be reutilized, but the landfill portion is then the 0.6% that's left over. This is a little bit about where we work, and basically it includes most of the European areas, and our main offices are in Finland and Sweden, but we're doing jobs wherever we need to go. Except, as you can see, there's no dots in Russia. A little bit about the style that our company operates in. We have, of course, all the sectors covered, much like our Italian and Netherlands friends, except we're not working in the offshore sector. But our company is specialized in value-added demolitions. So, for example, we can possibly pave to demolish your power station for you, or then we can add value by doing the second-hand sales that you were just talking about, and the dismantling operation, and finding sellers further abroad, or buyers rather further abroad. And we have a lot of experience in our company, so we have roughly 50 boilers in-house, and we do a lot of other industrial sector work. So that much about the company. Okay. The two case studies I'm going to look at shortly will be Kovaraar and Ussala. So this is the Kovaraar steel plant. So you can see some of the figures there, and it's not exactly something you come across every single day, so it's been a nice highlight. We did go through a lot of material, as you can see up there, roughly 80,000 tons of concrete, 60,000 tons of steel, and then, I don't know, something like 50,000 tons of slag to go through, which was something new and interesting, of course. The reason I'm talking about it is because we also conducted a dismantling operation and some resales to a country further away. And if we can play the first video, we can just have a short look at the site. Operation that took its sweet time when we were talking about the actual sales procedures involved. It was quite educational, but as you saw, we were also using explosive demolition for the blast furnace itself. We used something like 700 kilos of dynamite, and we kept the structure steady, and then later on finished off the demolition works. The ship you saw at the very end was the project ship. I think it had a capacity of 15,000 cubic meters, and we ended up filling that within roughly 1 month because we had the dock to ourselves, so there wasn't really an issue of time involved. Some of the hazards we had to overcome are listed there. The one I'd like to focus on are the two strange ones. So we had the possibility of having cyanide in the area because they had a very special electrostatic filter. And then there was also the problem of zinc. So if we didn't cover ourselves, we could get zinc poisoning from the dust. And during this, we managed to actually make the operations. And actually, you can see right there in the middle the cost for the cyanide as a byproduct, and the blast furnace on the right, and the chimney that you saw demolished on the left there. And then we had the operations, of course, for the dismantling that were taking place at the same time. And that's roughly the scale of one of the objects, so it's not huge, it's around 150 tons. Mainly there was an issue with how to get it out of there because there was a problem with the ceiling, and then there was a problem that it was hanging in the middle of nowhere. So how do you do this actually? How do you stand an egg on its end and put it into the vessel? So these are some of the questions that need to be answered on a daily basis if you're going to go into the field and actually try to plan something like this. So what actually happened in actuality is that we decided to not make it an egg, so we cut the top off. And rather than having to make a lift out of a big hole, all we did was fill the hole. So simple answers to interesting questions. And that's really one of the best ways to get good results. This unit that you're looking at is actually a mixer from 1965. But this is a good example of how you can maybe reuse something that you didn't think you could, because the functionality of the mixture itself is just a pot. That's really all you need is to have structural integrity, and then you finish off with the rest of the operations later on in the refurbishment phase. So this is an example of a large unit, or a large simple unit, we call it. And this is the actual lift. Nothing special there, but as you can see, the constraints are there as they were before. All right. All right. You got the video working. Okay, that's nice. So this is what it looks like inside a blast furnace. That's called black gold, or it's called carbon bricks. There are layers, if you can see on the right, there's layer 1 to layer 10, and I'm standing on, I think, layer 8 or 4, I can't remember exactly, but they're roughly 1 millimeter apart. And we found a way to actually get them out and make them reusable later on. And as you can see, we observed all the necessary safety procedures because we built a steel frame on top while we were unloading and made a very simple contraption just to get them out. And this is another example of, how to say it, a purposeful reuse. So this came from the same site. This is actually, the function of this particular machine is to strain out the billets and just make them straight. So all that's really involved is simple automations, and then there's a cooling line at the end. So again, a perfect possibility for reuse. And this was actually sent to Mexico. All told, from the site, we ended up reusing something like 6,500 tons of material for reuse, and they resulted in 2 different projects, one in Mexico and one in the north part of Africa. One of them is still both of them are still being built, if I understand correctly, at this time, but they should finish shortly. And here's a question for you also, that looking at the background, this is from a chemical fire that we were demolishing some time ago. Which of those parts do you think are reusable? And that's always a question in these sort of cases. But it's all about purpose and what really understanding the materials inside. Moving on, looking at После, which was a power station. This is 2014, so this is a little bit of time away. But we were also able to make sales here while we were preparing some explosive demolition, which I think we can just have a look at now. And so the staff was, can we have the second video? Can we have the second video, please? So, unfortunately, the marketing guys just got a little creative and put some Irish music, so I muted it. The opportunity to do this particular operation this way. The stack itself was 135 meters tall. And he's happy. All right, we can go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. So during this time, we were also planning the resale operation of some of the equipment inside the stack. Unfortunately, I can't reach high enough and the pointer doesn't work, but that would be on the left bottom side, over here. And here's another example of what the practicalities are related to actually if you're making these sort of operations, is that just by this sort of top sheet, there's an identifications in the materials just by looking at a particular, for example, if we look at the firing system, it's a dry NOx firing system. That means there's a possibility of reuse even in closer sectors. So the technical aspects actually indicate what sort of areas we can possibly make the reuse for. And we were able to make a resale actually based on the right picture for the pneumatics on the bottom that we weren't even thinking of. So just providing all the information to the client can sometimes lead to positive and unexpected results. And they actually went to use in Germany and Finland, even though they were a 93 product. And here's the actual photo of it coming out. Interesting thing about these things, they've been doing that forever, and they still pull out the generator rotor by hand. And this is if they want it for reuse. And that's the empty combustion chamber on the right. All right, and then moving into constructing the actual deal, about how you need to go about making the operations on a day-to-day basis. So on the right is what it's going to look like if you start planning this. Microsoft PowerPoint will become your friend and you will love it by the end of the project because there will be delays and there needs to be a way to manage these things. And this is really getting to the core point of the discussion I'd like to talk about, that when you're constructing a deal, most of the effort often goes into talking about just the price. All right, that's one of the main things that people want to talk about all the time. But that's going to have a lot of quality of life issues to actually completing the operation. I mean, you can live without a hand, but it's going to be difficult to point the clicker. And really, everything is connected to each other. And if you're just looking at one aspect of the deal, it's going to result in a mismatch of what your expectations are. And this is just by nature, because demolition, as you know well, is a one-time operation, whereas the dismantling operation itself is an operation that will result in reuse somewhere. So there needs to be a logistical operation in between that will accomplish this, and to keep them separate just by nature. And here are more theoretical things, but just an aspect of how the value added that you can get is calculated in practice. So everything originally on day one had some sort of purchase price, and the valuation you're going to get now is going to be less, but it's going to be more than the scrap value if you can make the proper adjustments to the equipment and find a possible buyer for it. And the thing here is to remember that if you're planning on making dismantling and resale operations, time is your enemy. So the thing to consider is that every moment you spend on that operation, you're not conducting your demolition operation, and you're having your site safety operations at the same time. So even though if you have a good resale case, you may end up revenue neutral. And this has happened to many of our colleagues. And now just A few things I'd like to touch on this particular slide is that there is such a thing as the right price. So if you gather together in a small room and think up a price, that's probably a good way to start. But talking to your friends, talking to your colleagues, this is a good opportunity also to compare notes with fellow entrepreneurs and companies about how you actually achieve the real price that you're looking at. And without the pointer here, but in reality, you're going to achieve some level of each of those bars in practice, and you're almost never going to achieve 100% value for your equipment. And the two things I'd like to point out is the under and overvaluing, and they're both dangerous. Especially I'd like to point out is bribery, because it leaves the door open for these sort of issues, and vulturing, which is basically you overprice. So you create a situation where companies will circle expecting the price to drop, and this is a contagious thing that happens very often, and it will result in a lot of delays. So it's better just to lower the price almost immediately to the correct point. So I'd also like to talk a little bit about working with, how to say, the operator or the owner of the equipment. So starting your cooperation early is something that needs to happen if you're looking into this. We're just looking at the list there. The equipment operator knows about the maintenance, operation, documentation, and the market. So basically they know about the purchase price, technology, condition, and the demolition operator, on the other hand, is very clear on what the scrap is, how you actually get it to the final product, and then the terms come from knowledge of dismantling operations, and also the fact that demolition operators like yourselves here do a lot of projects per year. So you're used to project-based thinking, whereas the current operator may not be. They think long-term, 20 years, 30 years, and you think it has to work now. So there's a lot of combined value in working together. And the real value that you're going to be getting from the remaining added value is basically, it depicts exactly how well you did. It's a measure of your performance in reality when you're adding it to what the right price really is. All right, so just a few key takeaways here. There is such a thing as the right price. Budget your costs, and then you have the nice graphs on the right side that you can read a little bit about there, and construct your deal with care. So just a few key takeaways here if you're planning on doing this sort of operations locally. And here's a picture of some of our subcontractors who never played ice hockey before. So we went skating to celebrate at the end, but just as a final message, I'm looking to buy some power plants and sell some equipment. I'm also looking for cooperators, so more than happy to talk to you later. Thank you very much.